Hi, it's CJ with CJatCompRCC.com. One of my subscribers suggested that I do a video about tools and Workspace, the various things you need to build kits. I thought that was a great idea, so here we are. He mentioned about this pad that I have in a lot of my videos and asked if this was actually a yoga pad. And yeah, this is a piece of an old yoga mat that my wife had, and she was going to get something new, and so I appropriated this. I'd like to support the hobby in any way I can. At the same time, if I don't have to spend a ton of money for something, I don't. Yoga mats start around $8 at Walmart, and they're 6 feet, 5'8", and a couple of feet wide. That's enough to cover a large work area and cut a couple of small pit mats to take to the track with you. So if you wear one out, it's not a big deal. I did a little research on pit mats. The least expensive one I saw was about $24, and they went up as high as $60. And that's an awful lot of money to be advertising someone's company with a big logo on a pit mat. A lot of them were rubberish material such as this, and some of them were neoprene, which is basically just wetsuit material. One of the reasons I like this in particular, aside from the fact that it didn't cost me anything, is this textured surface. If I drop a ball bearing, it doesn't roll very far or bounce off and disappear on me. And tools tend to not roll. If it's a round tool, it tends to find a spot to sit. Now, onto the tools. You're going to need some hex drivers. This is a kit offered by Team Associated. I bought this a handful of years ago. A lot of kits are moving toward all metric. For example, the new B5M, if you've watched any of my build videos on that, I'm very psyched about the fact that that kit only requires 2 wrenches. Almost everything on that car is a 2mm, so you don't necessarily need a huge assortment. I would recommend buying the things you need. I like the drivers that have a handle. I also like the bits. This was fairly inexpensive. This is an all-metric set, a 1.5, a 2, a 2.5, and a 3. Those are great for just using with a regular ratcheting screwdriver handle. Another thing where these things are great is power drivers. This little Ryobi, I think I paid $30 for this on sale. You want to get one that has a clutch, and that allows you to dial in how much force. I generally don't use these for assembly, but they're great for disassembling. And you can pretty much disassemble anything on a radio control car without damaging it with one of these. Like a transmission, you've got 6 bolts, they go in pretty far. Those are something you don't want to over torque, and you want to be gentle when you're putting those in. But taking those out, you can just buzz them right out, and it definitely saves you time. Specialized tools that you're going to want to have: a shock tool. These are for holding the shock shaft. As you can see, they've got little rounded spaces. A lot of them are like this. They've got different sizes for different size shock shafts. That allows you to grab the shock shaft and then twist on the little eyelet for the bottom without scoring or damaging the shock shaft. And since a lot of shock shafts these days are titanium or trinitride coated or some other type of specialized coating, you don't want to damage that. And they're not very expensive. And it's definitely worth having because you'll pay the price of that tool if you wreck a set of shock shafts. Another little specialized tool that's good to have is a turnbuckle wrench. TLR makes this. It's got a variety of sizes, 3.5, 5, and 4mm. Another specialized tool, body reamers. These things are very handy. Aside from just making near perfectly round holes in your body or any other piece of Lexan, they're great during certain assembly processes. Sometimes when you're trying to thread into hard plastic, like you're trying to get a ball stud into a wheel hub, sometimes it's a good idea to just auger the top of that hole just a little bit to help get that bolt threaded. You don't want to widen it out too much, of course, but again, there's a lot of uses for these. They come in really handy. Of course, the good old X-Acto knife number 11 blade. couple of different screwdrivers, straight edge, Phillips head, a micro straight edge. Those can be handy. Sometimes you've got to dig something out or get at something. General tools that you're going to want: needle nose, diagonal cutters, pair of pliers, cheap, easy. You probably got these around the house already. Small LED flashlight, good item to have if you're at an indoor track and you drop something on the floor under the pit table, or if you're out zooming around in the dark having fun with some friends and you drop something. It's just a good item to throw into the toolbox and have with you. Old toothbrushes are great for cleaning and getting grit out of places that you need to get it out of. This is kind of an unusual item. This is actually left over from my bicycle mechanic days. When I was younger, I used to race triathlons and mountain bikes. This is a 2mm wrench, and since I have a lot of 2mm hardware, I dug this out of my old toolbox and keep it around. It does give a little more leverage for a stuck bolt or something like that. Not necessarily something you're going to go shopping for, but having more than one 2mm wrench is a good idea. So when you build a kit and you get that little L-shaped Allen wrench with it, keep those, because as you can see from this wrench here, this 2mm has seen some use. It's definitely starting to get a little bit of wear going, and once those start to go, you really want to replace them. I've actually got one on order. You start tearing up your hardware and then everything starts stripping, so it's good to have a couple of those around in case you start to tear one up when you're at the track. Having another one to switch to is worth having. Measuring devices. I've got a couple of metal rulers here and a cheap little pair of calipers. I used to do mechanical engineering. I spent a lot of time working with digital calipers, and unless you're measuring things to the thousandth of an inch on a regular basis, spending the 40 to 100 plus on a good digital caliper isn't necessarily something you need to do. But I do recommend getting just a cheap pair. One of the things that I do use these for is when I'm assembling a kit and I open a bag and it's got 4 or 5 different size screws in it, and I'm looking through the instructions and it says, okay, you need 3 8mm and 2 5mm for this next step, and you've got a whole bunch of screws. I don't want to trust my eye. I don't want to guess. I don't want to try doing it by count. Yes, if you open a bag and it's got 4 of one and 6 of another, and it says use 4 and then 6, you pretty much know what sizes you've got. But it never hurts to take that little piece of hardware, hold it up against a ruler, and be sure that you're using the right screws, because there's nothing worse than getting 3 steps into something and going through this big bag of multiple pieces of hardware and find out that the screw that you need right now, you used somewhere else and you had the size wrong. Other things you're going to want to have: a car stand. This is a Pit Tech car stand. I think I spent like $8 on this maybe. They're not very expensive. There are rotating stands like this one, and there are also static stands. Both have advantages. I can't say that I like one or another. There's times when I like being able to rotate the car, make an adjustment here, spin it 180 degrees, make another adjustment. And then there's times when I'm trying to work on the car and it's rotating around on me and I wish it was sitting still. So, they both have their advantages. A shock stand. This is extremely handy when you are building or rebuilding shock absorbers. I cannot stress enough how handy these things are, because when you're building up a set of new shocks or rebuilding a set of existing shocks, you always want to make sure that you get all the bubbles out of the fluid. And a shock stand allows you to just drop the shocks in here as you've filled them, let them sit for a few minutes, move on to another step, and then come back when all the bubbles have risen up to the top, finish them off. It's just very handy and worth having. There's a lot of different models out on the market. Another thing that's worth having around are a variety of trays. As you can see, I have some items out here. I'm about to do a diff build. The gentleman who suggested I do this video asked about this particular tray. This is actually the bottom of a glass butter dish, and the top got broken, and I appropriated this. And I really like this because, number one, being glass, it's impervious. Liquid is not going to sink into it. It's not going to get stained. It doesn't retain the smell of chemicals, things like that. And it cleans up in a snap. Just wipe it out. It's also heavy, so it's, it's hard to tip it over. You've really got to make an effort to get that sucker to flip over. And it's heavy glass, so it's hard to break it. This has actually served me for a couple of years, and I almost always use this. That's the first thing I dump fresh parts into because it's easy to keep clean. You know when it is clean and when it's not because it's clear glass. This is another similar type of tray. I use this a lot when I'm assembling cars. I'll throw the bearings in here. I'll put a little bit of light oil and let them sink into the bearing. A lot of times I'll run some oil through them just to be sure. Or I'll just throw parts in here that I'm not using at the moment that I'm going to need in a few steps. This I actually got about a year ago at a hospital. I was having a bunch of titanium put in my lower spine, and I think they served me pudding in this. I was like, hey, that's a nice little tray, and wiped it out and brought it home. I've got a handful of other items that are just old Tupperware. Here is a Tupperware little tub that I use. I just keep a variety of different lubricating products and shock oil products and things like that in here. Now on this vein, things that you want to have: black grease, green slime. I highly recommend this product. It's indispensable when you're building shocks. Watch any of my shock build videos and you can see that I use that on all the seals, and I put it on the threads of the shock shafts every time I run a shock shaft through a set of seals. Even if I'm rebuilding, if I pull that piston out and I've got the shaft out, I always put a little green slime on the threads when I slide it back in, just to make sure that I don't tear up the seals at all. This is diff lube. Most of you probably recognize this just like the black grease. This is TLR's, comes with the diff. Always make sure to have some on hand for any time you got to rebuild your diff. You never know when you're going to have to do that in a pinch. Blue Loctite, you can get this at almost any hardware store. Anytime you're doing metal on metal, it's good to have a little bit of blue Loctite. Lexan scissors. These go hand in hand with your body reamer when you're cutting out a new body. They have a little bit of a curve, so that makes it easy to go around corners to either side. Not a very expensive item, worth having. I'm pretty much going to cover just about everything I keep in my toolbox and bring to the track. Some sticky pads, a couple of Sharpies, pencil, ballpoint pen, good things to have around. This is kind of a specialized tool. This is a TLR product. It's a shock balancing tool. I definitely like using this. There's a variety of different ways and situations that you would use that. I've got a video online. It's either up now or it will be shortly, where I demonstrate how this is used. Okay, then there's some adhesives, tapes, etc. Let me slide a few of these things out of the way. Zip ties. Very handy. Electrical tape. I have a couple of types of two-sided tape. This is a silicone type of two-sided tape. It's really good. Good old 3M. And I've got a couple of strips here that came with different kits. I generally use this, but there are times when that seems to work better. Good old super glue, never hurts to have a few of those along. This is a tire gluing kit. It's basically tire glue. Tire glue is a slow CA, and you can use slow CA. It's got some large rubber bands. I've also got a tire gluing video coming out, so I will go over how you use these in greater detail then. Some Velcro tape. You just peel it, stick it, cut it to the lengths you need. I know some other people also use this for sticking on bodies. It's great for buggy bodies where the body fits right up against the side of the buggy chassis. It's also good if you've got a dirt shield. Some short course truck kits have a secondary body that covers just the chassis because the short course body is very large, hangs out over the wheels, and you've got this little inner body that you can get as an option that keeps as much dirt as possible out of your electronics. Sandpaper, 600 grit and finer. If you've watched any of my diff build videos, you'll see what I use this for. And there's a variety of other things you can use this for during a build process. Sometimes there's some extra flashing that you want to clean up on a plastic item. Never hurts to have a little bit of that around. And then here I've got a couple of tuning tools. This is a Team Losi ride height gauge. I would say that, for example, these two items here, this would be about the minimum that you need as far as tuning tools for off-road cars. On-road cars are a lot more complex in their tuning needs. You've got to worry about tweak and balance at all four corners, left and right chassis balance. There's a lot of factors that go into properly tuning a road car. This is a road car ride height gauge. Basically, a ride height gauge just lets you set a ride height and slide it under the chassis, and it either is at the right height or it's not. This is a camber gauge, lets you measure positive and negative camber. This came in an old Team Associated kit. It's got 3 degrees, 1 degree, and 2 degrees, so you would just hold that up against your wheel and see if it's got the right setting. I prefer this because it's infinitely adjustable. It's a lot more granular. Other items to have are storage boxes. And this is just a couple in a variety of sizes. This was about $4. It's made by Yeah Racing. Each one of these little boxes has 3 separate containers. It's great for small parts like shock spacers and O-rings, pinion gears, little bolts, things like that. I don't even think that this is RC car specific. I'm looking to see it. I can't quite read that label that's stamped in there. This is just a sectioned off plastic box, great for various shock and body adjustment parts. And these I just throw into the toolbox and bring with to the track. Some products here, cleaning products. These are just handy wipes. Great to have. Bringing some cleaning solution, a small spray bottle with some Windex or something like that to the track is a good idea. These are actually car care products. This is a lint-free microfiber towel for doing automobile windows. This is great when you're working on shocks because lint-free pretty much says it all. You don't want to be getting fibers into your shocks. These are also microfiber towels. They're very soft. You're not going to scratch anything up. You can throw them in the machine washer. They're very inexpensive, so if you trash one, it's not that big a deal. They don't shed lint the way a paper towel or even a cotton towel would. Another tool that you're definitely going to need is soldering iron and the things that go with it. This is actually one of the nicest little soldering irons I've ever used. It's made by Weller. I got this at Radio Shack. Looks like it might be rechargeable. It's not. You just plug it in. You've got a thin wire running off it. Turn it on, turn it off. It's got a little LED. It's very easy to handle. It's got a nice grip to it. Not a very expensive item. Some solder. Get yourself a variety of heat shrink tubing. It's very handy when you've got multiple leads and you want to identify positive and negative, or in the case of a brushless motor, you've got 3 leads, generally blue, yellow, red, and you want to be able to make sure that you differentiate those. Assorted wiring and assorted connectors. Some people really like mini Deans. I think mini Deans are great. I also like to use the 4mm gold coated male-female plugs. Those are great when you want to be able to move a motor speed controller from one car to another. That way you just segment the wires and you can unplug the motor from the speed controller and take it out of a car, use it in another kit for a while, put it back later. Those are very handy to have, and they're not terribly expensive. I think they run about $7 or $8 for a pack. You get about 8 male and female combined. Some people like the Tamiya connectors. I already mentioned the mini Deans. There's a variety of connectors available, and whatever type of connector that you like to use, it's probably a good thing to have a handful of them around as spares. In case you need to wire something up quickly, you've got everything you need. This is an item that a lot of people don't necessarily think about. A lot of chargers have the option to plug into a 12-volt source, but that doesn't help you if you want to solder. Getting a little power inverter. This is a product by APC. It's got a single 120-volt output, plugs into a cigarette lighter, and this is great if I want to solder or use some other type of tool like a dremel. This is also optional, but I do find this to be very handy at times. This is a dremel. I highly recommend the variable speed. If you're going to buy a dremel in the first place, spend the extra couple dollars to get the variable speed. One of the things that these can be very handy for is cutting holes in bodies. For example, short course truck bodies need a lot of air vent holes cut in them. Can't really get in there with a Lexan scissors, but a Dremel with a small sanding drum is great for grinding away the Lexan and getting a nice smooth shape. Also getting rounded corners into Lexan. There are times when I'm cutting out a wing for a buggy, let's say, and I need to cut the little circular areas out for the shock clearance. I'll trim it out roughly with a pair of Lexan scissors, and then I'll go back with this and a sanding drum and just grind away at it, and it comes out very nicely. I've had great results with it. As far as workspace, as large a workspace as you can manage without having your wife or significant other give you a hard time about it. If you can, set up shelves or any type of cubbies. Well, that about covers it. I've gone over the absolutely necessary items that you're going to have and a lot of different options for you to consider. Everyone has their own choices in products and what they like, manufacturers of tools, what type of stand you want, etc. Go with what works for you. I hope you've gotten some food for thought out of this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Please click like. I can use all the thumbs ups I can get. Come back and check out the other videos on my channel.